waking up and just exploring some restlessness. And seeing how it pieces together in my relationship with God, Goddess, with spirituality. And number one, the experiences of being willful and saying no. And its age is probably 4 to 6 years old. Its biggest pleasure and sadness is disrupting things, is of having impact, of saying no. And the no in this case is to angels, visions, dreams, magic, presences, partner. It's just saying no. And there's some part that's saying no to this video. But as I'm flailing around and seeking to be conscious of what is and is not conscious, speaking, which I seem to be able to manage when talking to a camera, as opposed to just mumbling to myself or writing with my numb hands. Speaking seems to be a good idea. But what I'm looking at is a big wall of no, a big wall of hurt, a big wall of exclusion, and a big wall of loneliness and hurt. And it seems to start with my mother unable and unwilling to honor a no. Meaning that she's so disconnected from herself and from me that she's not able to honor a no in herself or in me. And it goes to a level of perversity where it seems like she actually enjoys the power of pushing through a no. And I remember this with tickling. I remember this with touching. I remember this with her pushing me on the swing when I wanted to stop. Pushing me to talk in areas that I didn't want to talk. That basically I experienced violation and overstimulation to a point of sadness. To a point that was bigger than I could process. It was just overwhelming. And so it turned into trauma and helplessness. It turned into sadness and unconsciousness. It turned into dissociation, which is the effect of trauma. And no became my refuge, my weapon, and fighting became the only way that I knew how to relate. There's a core antagonism that's it's about placing the hurt that I feel in front of someone and saying no. And I don't know how to relate to someone without that element of hurt and antagonism. It's almost as if that because the bond with mom was defined with a sociopathic pushing and overstimulation until I said no, and that I didn't seem to exist unless I said no. And my only existence seemed to be saying no. And so there's some part of me pushing. Into terrain that I can say no in. And there's some part of me pushing other people into terrain that they can say no in an effort to become conscious. It's like, what are you saying no to? So I have this internalized pusher that does not feel satisfied until one, there is a no, and two, it is articulated and clearly defined. That if it's not articulated and clearly defined, it's not good enough. There's no real connection. And one of my great anxieties relating to this template is that with a gentle, laid-back person, with a gentle, laid-back person, I cannot, particularly if I'm afraid of rejection, I don't know how to find flow. I just know how to plow right in, and I know how to assume this position, which is kind of like a 7-year-old tricking mom. Like I would tease my mother and do the same to her. Like I would take something she wanted, and like maybe if she was cooking, I would take her cooking ladle and then get out of reach and then wait for her to look for it and then show that I had it, but then not give it back or not want to engage. And so I'm just seeing how saying no was one of the ways that I felt like I could have my own voice. And yet, because my yes was never honored, because there's so much powerlessness, so much shame in not being honored, and so much hurt. There's just these big parts of me that are just a solid no, that it's not even specific. It's just no. And when one part of me invites and invokes a deeper connection with grace, with magic, with spirituality, this part of me that has a no, that's the only thing that it knows how to relate to in this area, is just to say no and to be defiant. And a parent, a parent might respond to that if I hide in the corner or say no. But most of the world and divinity doesn't. I'm just left there with that coping strategy of feeling hurt and overwhelmed and saying no, or pushing too much. And nobody's getting, one, that I want attention, two, that I don't have another language in that terrain within which to engage. I don't have another way, and that nobody's seeing that persona and what's going on. Or the sadness and grief of not being able to be met and known in all these terrains. It just feels like a lot of sadness and grief. And a lot of withdrawal in these areas where my requests and details are not acknowledged. Because what I'm saying is I want to exist here. And so I'm actually creating obstacles for people to go over so that I can feel that I exist. Because I'm saying like this and like this and like this. And when they do that, I feel like I matter in a way that I just don't get it otherwise. There's just a whole blind spot in that area of mattering. And I don't get it otherwise. All right, well, that's all I know how to say. Other than to you, Dane, I'm really sorry that you've had this experience. I'm sorry that you've got such a crude and limited language. I'm sorry you didn't have a mother who was attuned. I'm sorry that in the inability to connect, you're so lonely. I'm sorry that the withdrawal, the unconsciousness, the hurt, and the antagonism are all states of grief, shock, trauma, and loneliness. There's nothing that's enjoyable for you in that terrain. And that is not enjoyable for anyone else either. It's just a miserable prison of a rotation. And when you're in this place, like this morning, laying in bed and just saying no, or reaching out and trying to initiate some kind of conflict as a way of feeling connected. You have a partner who's very kind and sensitive and very loving and generous. But within that language, there's no way to really connect. There's just hurt and smallness. And then safety when that isn't rejected. That's basically the terrain, because you don't like that. I don't like that. No one else really likes that. And yet, you're so entangled in that early pattern, and it's at such a young age. And the brain has stopped developing in those early years in that terrain. It's a very, very incomplete brain in that terrain. And the question is what to do about it. And I don't know, because when I'm so small, there's no one big to love me in those areas. The best I can do is talk about it. So there's a lot of pain there. Thank you.